Joining me now is Jerry Seib, executive Washington editor at the Wall Street Journal and resident fellow at Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. Jerry, great to have you here tonight. We know it's not going to be a malaise speech. Obviously, history has sort of taught that lesson. What should we be listening for?
Well, to state the obvious, this is not the speech Joe Biden thought he was going to be delivering even 2 weeks ago. And to further state the obvious, the backdrop is going to be as dramatic as I can remember for any State of the Union since after 9/11, I would say. And I think on Ukraine, he's going to have to start by walking a tightrope, convince Americans that he is doing enough to help the Ukrainian people. And I suspect Americans are both sympathetic with and inspired by what they're seeing the Ukrainians do right now, while also convincing them that he's not going to stumble into a direct military conflict with Russia or get involved directly on the ground in Ukraine. That's a tough balance to strike, but that's what he's going to have to do. And then, as your reporting has been suggesting here, I think all afternoon, he's going to have to confront, I think, head-on the reality that what's happening in Ukraine is going to make the inflationary pressures in this country worse, tell people that they need to be prepared for that, and have something to say about both what he would do to lessen inflation and what he will do to help people cope with inflation. Any
late sense of measures that might be taken to lower the gasoline price?
Well, there's not much to do, right? I mean, you have heard Democrats talk about a moratorium on the federal gas tax, but that gives you 18 cents a gallon or so. It doesn't feel like a whole lot in the face of $4 plus a gallon gas. You can release some more petroleum from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. What Republicans want him to do, and what he probably won't do because there's pushback in his party, is talk about ways to expand drilling and production of oil on the continental United States. But, even that is a longer-term proposition. That's not a next week kind of proposition. So The truth is, I think his options are limited.
So, a lot's been made of the response to the Ukraine crisis, and the split in the Republican Party is quite marked. But it also seems to me that the response from the Democratic side harks back almost in a way to what we heard from Republicans early in the Bush years. It feels like this realignment where President Biden is out there talking about how we have to be a force for freedom in the world. And that's exactly the language that President Bush used sort of infamously in his second inaugural. And then we saw Iraq and Afghanistan and everything that happened since. So it does feel like the polls have shifted. And I wonder what the long-term consequences of that will be.
Well, I think you framed both the opportunity and the challenge for President Biden tonight. This is an opportunity to be stirring and inspirational about the need for the U.S. to defend democracy and to defend freedom around the world. And by the way, at least implicitly push back against the kind of neo-isolationist tendency in both parties that says the world doesn't need American leadership. I think Joe Biden's view, which he's articulated for decades, is the world does need American leadership, and we can now see that. So I think that's the opportunity. I think the challenge is, again, to convince Americans that there is a way to do that without creating another long-term foreign entanglement. I mean, people don't want another Iraq, another Afghanistan, a 20-year involvement somewhere. But the reality is we now have to worry about Russia again. We have to worry about nuclear weapons in Russia again. And we have to worry about the state of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, an alliance that former President Donald Trump was prepared to just walk away from if he'd gotten a second term. So this is a big moment for Joe Biden. I think the advantage that he has is he will be talking his own book. He actually is an internationalist, and he actually believes in alliances, and he actually believes the U.S. has a role to play, particularly at times like this. We'll see if he can articulate that in a way that sets people's minds a bit more at ease.
Sure, but you're right. It's absolutely authentic to who he is. Neil Ferguson this week suggested that the president, though, only has days to prevent the Ukraine situation from really becoming a quagmire. He invoked the Israel example and the support that we quickly gave them in the past, and literally in a matter of hours and days in order to defend themselves when they were under attack. Again, that was not, I believe, at the time a country that we were required by any treaty to do so. Do you agree about the urgency of the situation in Ukraine, and do you see the international response meeting that need?
Well, I think that the situation is pretty dire because you have every reason to think, and the evidence on the ground today suggests the Russians will simply get more brutal. If they couldn't take what they wanted in Ukraine the easy way, they're going to do it the hard way. And I think we're starting to see the beginnings of that in Kyiv and elsewhere around the country. So it's going to be very messy. Is the international community doing enough? Probably not. But I mean, at this point, the options are limited. The U.S. is trying to get some more military assistance in. Poland is helping provide that overland. It may be that what this evolves into is, in fact, a very long, protracted urban warfare kind of a situation in which the Ukrainians are fighting for themselves with limited help from the outside. Not a very satisfying picture. Probably one that ought to worry Vladimir Putin, though, and that's something I think President Biden also can point out tonight.
Great point. Jerry, again, great to have you on today. Thank you so much for your insights.
Good to see you.
Jerry Seib with the Wall Street Journal.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.